Hello, everybody. We're happy to be back with you. I'm Megan, and I've got my best friend Brenda here.
Hi.
We've been buddies since preschool, really.
When
which is
was
a long
that? 96 or something?
Yeah,
97?
we were 90s babies. It was a great time to grow up. But we've been close friends since middle school and high school, and pretty much ever since then. We've had some good times and bad times together.
And I'd say we spent most of our weekends and summers together
Yes.
in middle and high school. I
Oh,
would say the
yes.
majority
I would
of
say
all
so.
weekends and all summer break.
Yes. Talking about boys.
Yeah.
That's what we, that's what we did. That's all we did. I don't even know what else we did after.
We were boy obsessed.
Yeah.
We were boy crazy.
It was really goofy looking back.
Looking
So
back
don't
on it now, no.
spend your time with your friends in other ways if you can do it.
I'm sure there's
Anyway.
much better things to talk
There
about.
definitely are. Well, you can see the title here, When Bad Things Happen. Like I said earlier, we have been best friends for years, and most of that has been great, but sometimes, both have hit hard times, and we're going to, Brenda's definitely going to share her story tonight. Um, but one thing that I used to think, a big misconception, like as a Christian growing up in church, I really went through a season where I thought like really bad things only happen to people who weren't Christians unless
Yeah.
some freak thing happened. I don't know.
Yeah, kind of like bad things can't happen to
Yeah.
good, godly people. Like we're
Yes.
exempt from it or something.
Like there's praying your hedge of protection every day was gonna somehow protect me from any harm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like that was one of the reasons I think I was a Christian almost
Mhm.
as a teenager.
Yeah,
I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this so I don't go to hell
Yeah.
and I can get my way.
yeah. Well, especially as a teenager, I feel like you feel invincible. Like literally nothing can happen to you because you're like young and we don't have health problems and like we,
Right.
those types of things. So I think you just think it can't happen to me.
Right. It wouldn't happen to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, you feel what you feel so strongly. Like I remember, and you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about. Freshman, sophomore year, there was this guy that I really liked who I definitely I'm so thankful I didn't marry or end up with.
The
Looking back.
Lord delivered us through a lot of
Yes, he
situations.
did. But I mean, I literally went, I was so depressed, so mad, at the world. And I felt those feelings. They were legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
But, I've also, with something like that, looking back, I'm like, oh, that was not really a big deal. But it felt like a big deal. And I felt like my world was crashing down.
Yeah. At that age, I feel like anything is a huge deal and it's the end of the world
Yes.
when something happens. And it's very superficial stuff. Like, that we're older now and we've experienced life and we know, some things and we've been through some things that are really, truly hard.
Absolutely.
And I know, but as a teenager, it's such surface level stuff.
Yeah.
Like relationships was mainly the one, our lives were over.
Yes.
When we couldn't be with that boy.
It was
Something that was
bad.
about as much as
Yeah.
that we did. Like
That's
that was
true. It consumed us.
Mhm.
And really looking back, that was such an attack from the enemy. He used
Yeah.
that. He used our obsession with boys.
Oh yeah, to completely distract us.
100%. We did not ever talk about the Bible.
No, and if that's one thing, I know you all might have talked about this already in your
Mhm.
podcast, but if there is one thing I could change is just telling myself, meeting myself back when I was 14 or 15 and being like, there's so much more to your life than this. You might not be
Yes.
able to see it right now,
True.
but
Very
there's
true.
so much more to your life.
Absolutely.
If you would just wake up and see it, and
Yep.
I didn't, and we,
Absolutely. Just realize where you're at in life.
Mhm.
Definitely, do what you need to do, but don't sweat the small stuff. Even if you think, oh, this is a huge deal, it might not really be. And
Mhm.
you'll probably look back and say, wow, that was not a big deal.
Yeah.
But I thought it was.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes things do happen that are big deals.
Right.
And that is, something we're going to talk about. One thing you need to know, and we already said this, as a Christian, you're not exempt from hardship. Mm-hmm. The Bible never, ever, ever says that because you're following Jesus, things are going to be easy. You're going to get your way. Bad things aren't going to happen to you. That is not the case. But the good thing is that if you are a Jesus follower, God will be with you during every single season that you face. Mm-hmm. And that is huge. And I know that's part of my testimony. That's part of Brenda's testimony. Mm-hmm. And we're going to share that. So if you want to kind of just go over your story,
yeah,
I think that would be like awesome.
Okay. Sorry.
You're good.
Hope we can edit that out. Yeah, so, like Megan was saying, we've been, friends for a long time, and I definitely, once I tell my story and, like, looking back, like, God really placed you guys in my life at just the right time, because I think, when I was going through all of this, I spent a lot of time at Megan's house, during everything, and, her parents just opened up her home to me, which was amazing, but when I was 15, so I'll just go and start from the beginning. I was 15. I had just met my husband, Jeremy, not that long before. Mm-hmm. And I actually gave my life to the Lord on, it was March of 2018. I was 15. And I had backstory. I kind of grown up in church for the most part. I knew God. I knew who God was. Mm-hmm. I went to youth group with Megan so we could hang out. That was basically my relationship with the Lord. That was non-existent at that point. So, at that time in 2008, I gave my life to the Lord. And looking back, I think it happened because, he knew what was going to happen.
Absolutely.
So it was, a big comfort to me. But that same year in June, my mom had been battling with, I don't remember exactly how she ended up getting diagnosed, but she ended up one day going to the emergency room, and they did a scan, and they found a tumor behind her lung or something like that. So over the course of, the next few months, she was diagnosed with cancer, and then she ended up having a big surgery, and then she went through radiation and chemo over the course of that year. And then that next year, almost about a year from the time she was diagnosed, so in 2009, she ended up passing away from cancer. Like I said, during that time, my dad and like my aunts and things were running her back and forth to treatments in Lexington and things like that. So I stayed with Megan a lot, I remember, during that time. But that was the summer right before our senior year happened.
Yep, 2010.
Yep. So, that was June of 2009, and so we started our senior year that year. I'm an only child, so me and my dad were just kind of, grieving and stuff together. I did have, like I said, I was with Jeremy still at this time, and he was a big, he was around, and he was a big comfort and things, and he kept us company and things like that. But so the beginning, I think, of that next year of like 2010, at some point, my dad ended up getting sick. He had had some health problems before with, like, he had a few heart attacks, I think. And both of my parents were a little bit older when they had me, but so he was in his, like, 50s at this point. But he had had some heart attacks, and then he started having some issues, and he ended up, he was diagnosed with a different kind of cancer. Around that same time, it was in early 2010. I don't remember exactly when. So he spent some time in the hospital, and I really think he might have just kind of gave up a little bit after my mom died from grief. He battled for a little while, but he ended up getting put on hospice care, and he passed away in July of 2010. So he was able to like make my graduation and all that kind of stuff, which was really special. But he ended up, you know, passing. Yeah. So that was just a really hard time that and like I said before, like you don't think that stuff is going to happen to you until you're in it, and it's like, what is this? Like my world is completely turned upside down. Yeah. And, you know, I guess I had matured enough to that point to, like, you know, my head was kind of more in the right space. Yeah. And things like that. And, you know, I had gave my life to the Lord. But it's strange, but the peace that I felt during that time, during the whole thing, that I mean, it had to have come from the Lord. Yeah, and absolutely. That I think God just showed me His presence. He showed me His love. He just wrapped His arms around me through that time. So just like you were saying, like, bad things can happen to us. Absolutely. But God is with you. I can't explain the peace that I felt. Like, I mean, you would think like your parents just died, both of them, like in a very short amount of time. I was 16 and 17 when that happened. Yeah, like where everybody else was like prom and graduation and like you went to those things, but it's still your focus was not on I was having a struggle, you know, at home and things like that. Yeah. And so yes, the peace that the Lord gave me through that time, just knowing they're in a better place, it's going to be okay. And there's been a lot of things that I've dealt with since that happened, you know. I think a lot of you guys can probably, like, resonate with, like, the feelings of, like, being anxious and depressed and things like that. And so it's important when things do happen, I think, to, like, deal with your feelings at that time. Yes. I think if I could go back, I mean, I had great family and great people in my life, but I think if I could go back, I would have, like, wanted more, like, maybe speak with a pastor or, like, speak with, like, even go to therapy or something like that, just to kind of work through that. Right. Because what I found is I kind of like to suppress my emotions a little bit, and you all might be able to, like, you know, relate to that, but it's caused, you know, just some lasting effects into my adulthood. For sure. So I think it's very important, you know, if you go through things, take it to God, which, you know, God gave me the peace through that time. Definitely. But I don't think that I dealt with those emotions correctly. So I think it's important that when things do happen to you, it's good to, you know, take them to the Lord, get some help working through those, because still, even if I had matured, you know, past my boy crazy stage, I was still just a teenager. Right. Even, you know, I turned 18 soon after my dad passed, but that still doesn't make you an adult. No. I don't think, like, and able to deal with those types of emotions. So that's what I would tell anyone, you know. That's just something very traumatic to go through at a young age. And I know, you know, there's a lot of, like, our youth kids or whoever, they've been through some stuff. Oh, yeah. Too. Absolutely. And they'll continue, unfortunately. Yeah. But just the peace that you feel from the Lord through that is really, like, if I did not have God, if I didn't know the Lord, I really probably could have took a bad path. For sure. Absolutely. Trying to deal with all of those emotions and navigate through things. Could have went really south. Because a lot of times, especially, like, you're thinking a high school girl going through all this, if you weren't on the path that you were on, thank God you were, you know, nowadays we talk a lot about depression and self-harm and, like, all this stuff that, you know, doesn't come from God, but it's definitely from the enemy. Yeah. Drinking, drugs, that partying. Definitely been a path. Yeah. You know, a way to cope. Yeah. Because you're going to cope. People will say they don't know how to cope. You're going to cope somehow, and it might be through God. You might be like, okay, I'm going to pray, I'm going to worship, or you're going to choose all this other stuff that's of the world. Yeah. And that's not going to end well for anybody. No. So. No. And, yeah, I mean, ultimately through that, even though it was the most challenging thing, you know, I've experienced in my life, just the closeness I felt with the Lord, the growth that I've had. Soon after that, I went to college, and me and Megan remained friends, and then we ended up starting a Christian band. And those are some really good times that I felt like I grew
a lot. Sure.
And so I just think, like I said, if I didn't have the Lord during that time, I feel like I could have went on a terrible path that would have had a lot of consequences.
Yeah.
And things like that.
I feel like we all really, at the band part of our life that season, we were legit, okay? We had a van, we had T-shirts, we had fans.
When we went somewhere, people be like, "You're not as bad as I thought you'd be. You were better. You were better than I thought you'd be." That was good. And we were very happy with
We were like, yeah. But we did so much growth through that. So I don't know. Like, it might sound silly to you to like start a band, but it was good for us.
Start a band.
It was great for us. But I love that, like, our youth kids. You were talking about support, and not everybody that listens to this podcast is like comes to our youth group or comes to our church even. But I feel like at the time when you were going through all that, it just wasn't established. We didn't know what a small group was. But if we would have had a small group for you to be able to come to, and now there's so many different pastors that do counseling and therapists like in our community.
Yeah.
Like, I think you would have if you would have known about it, you would have taken advantage of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like our kids,
they've got a lot of resources out there. They've got a lot of support. Yeah. And it's just good to have a good set of friends around you too. Like-minded people that are going to lift you up.
Absolutely. Grow together.
It's so important, the crowd that you're around.
It is.
I know that's probably a completely different subject, but
it's so true. It's so true. And I think we've learned a lot. One thing, probably, I honestly didn't think it through or really learn it until I was like in the Leap band when we did a crazy amount of spiritual growth. I call it a spiritual growth spurt because that's like really what it was. We learned so much during that season. Yeah. And one of the sermons I had heard during that time was like, why do bad things happen? And it was broken down really simply. And it starts in Genesis in your Bible. If you look at the story of Adam and Eve and creation and all that, you see that Satan, the enemy, actually brought all that in when Adam and Eve sinned against God and ate the fruit. That was supposed to be a perfect world. It was a utopia, and then they chose sin. And we would have done the same thing. We would like to hope that we didn't or wouldn't, but we would have
figured out some way to have brought it in.
Yes.
Like they did.
So when Eve was tempted, when Adam was tempted, they said, okay, let's take part. Let's eat the fruit. And if you're not familiar with the story, I suggest reading it in Genesis. Look it up on Google. But that is when evil came into the world. And God did not want these things that we're talking about to happen. That was never his intention. Now, he can use things like death. He can use things like, a breakup or depression or whatever. He can use all that for good. He will make that a part of your story and a part of your testimony.
But it's not like God is just like up there throwing stuff at you.
No.
That's not, what's happening.
Absolutely.
Yes, he can use your hardships to bring you out on the better side and closer to him.
Absolutely.
But he's not like causing these things. It's because of this broken world that we live in that things just happen.
Absolutely.
And I know that that's hard to like understand, especially if you've been through stuff. It's like, why me?
Right. Does God say, okay, Brenda, I'm going to throw some cancer at your parents? No. Okay, no. Now I believe that, like, is God in control? Yes. Does he allow things? Yes. But sickness, disease, sin, that is not from God. That is why actually Jesus came. period. He came to destroy all that and defeat it. Now, while we're on earth, we're still going to face hardships. We're still going to face all these challenges that we're talking about. But if you are a Christian and you believe that Jesus came, died, rose from the grave, then one day when you're in heaven or when perfect earth is made, we will have a world without disease, without sin. And it will be great. And I'm so excited for that. I cannot wait. Yeah. But just know that God did not cause all these bad things that, we've talked about or whatever you're facing. Jesus came to defeat all those things.
Yeah.
Because humans chose it.
We chose these things. So that's the consequences.
Mm-hmm. And with love, there's always a choice. If you're looking at something that's true love, there's a choice. Are you going to choose Jesus? Or are you going to choose Satan?
Yeah.
Because God gives us free will.
Yeah.
So the ball's in your court.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can choose love or the opposite of love.
Yeah.
And that's how we look at it as Christians. And that's the best way I know to kind of explain it and to justify it. I hope that made sense.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely. And, just because, God didn't cause these things, but he knows that it hurts you.
Yes.
He knows that, he knows it's hard.
Uh-huh.
And it's okay for you to go to him.
Absolutely.
With your questions.
Uh-huh.
And, he can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't cause it, but he can comfort you. Maybe you can, get some comfort in that, get some answers, get some peace.
Yes.
By just praying and talking to the Lord.
It's good.
Worship music, reading your Bible, different things like that. That's all about, how you can grow closer.
Absolutely. And if you are not feeling like, if you're going through something horrible and you don't feel like praying, I suggest, first off, ask friends for prayer to stand in the gap for you. Ask God, say, I don't feel like praying.
And he can handle it.
He can handle it.
It's okay to go to God with things like that.
It is, and it's hard, and we don't like to think about it like that, but that is what he desires when we're going through these things. And I really can't say that I experienced a whole lot of hardship until I was like a full-grown adult. We had a terrible miscarriage. We were like almost halfway to full term, and I also, like before that, had lost a niece who died at 4 months, and I went through a season where I just read the Psalms. I was like, I don't know what words to say. Don't really know how to approach this, and like those Psalms are there to give you words when you don't have words,
because it's literally like, David cried out to God in those Psalms. His life was not easy.
No.
Either.
No.
And so that's a really good book to pray through if you do not know what to say.
Yeah, just read them.
There's some really good, like I said, crying out to God. There's things about rejoicing in the Lord.
Yes.
And things like that in there.
Yep,
but
it's good.
That is really good.
Yeah. So I think, try to, like Brenda was saying, try to go in prayer, stay in the Word. Know that all of you, every single one of you, are struggling in some way. You are not alone.
No.
Now, not everybody, is having like your situation go on. Maybe, and it's okay. If the worst thing in your life is you've got a boy that broke up with you or a girl that broke up with you, like that's okay. That's great.
Yeah. Your problems are, big to you. They're big to God.
They
you
are.
can go to him with those.
Everything, every problem is going to be valid to God. He wants you, and he loves you, and he's always going to choose you. And I think that's important to remember anytime you're facing something. But I do have a few scriptures, and we'll post these on the notes. There's so many things, so many times in the Bible that hardships and hard times are mentioned. But one of them is from James. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." not if you face, but when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work in you so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So God's going to use your hard time for good. You're going to come out. Yep, you're going to come out of it on the other end a different person. Whatever you do experience is part of your story, and your testimony, which is awesome. Another one from 1 Peter verse 5:7, cast all your worries on him because he cares for you.
That's a good one.
Yes. So, like I said, we'll link some of those on the notes with a prayer or two, but
one that became one of my favorites during that time, and I forgot to mention, but I found this verse, and it's just kind of stuck with me through my life, is Psalm 46:1. It's God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in times of trouble.
That's good.
So that's the one that I just kind of like, I found it, and I'm like, this is my verse.
Yeah,
this is what I'm going to kind of stick with. So that was a good one.
I love
and
it.
There's a ton.
There are.
Yeah.
I dealt with some anxiety and depression, and I remember reading in Philippians a million times, be anxious for nothing, pray about everything. And so, like, that's what I did. Yeah. And I can say I'm a way less anxious person. I read that verse over myself, probably 100,000 times.
Yeah.
And it transformed my life.
Yeah.
So there is power in the Word of God, and you definitely need to read it and read it aloud. And
there's
pray
power
it.
In our words.
Yes.
When we speak them out loud.
Yes, there really is. God has designed our brains to where they can be rewired, which is amazing. And I can say from personal experience that by reading these verses out loud, and I'm sure you've done the same, that your brain literally and your desires, like everything, transforms and changes, which is like, thank God for that,
Yeah.
Thank God we can change and transform as people.
Yeah, we're not stuck in how we are.
No. We're not stuck.
We're not stuck.
That's good. That's a good end note. Do you have anything else for us?
I don't think so.
Well, I'm really glad that you came on to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We'll probably have you and
fun.
Jeremy back sometime on it.
Such a good time.
Yeah. Well, your story is unique and powerful, and, this is one way that God is using your story for good. Yeah. Like, you probably never would have thought back when you were a senior in high school that you'd be doing a podcast. That wasn't even a thing.
I didn't know what that was.
You just sharing your story to so many people. So thank you for being on the podcast. And guys, we're glad that you've tuned in and listened, and we're excited to see how you guys put some of this stuff into practice, and we'll see you next week. We love you guys.